So for this chapter 3.2 is solving quadratics. So the first one, this one, how can we solve this quadratic? Well, this one is already factorized, which means that is two linear factors that are being multiplied, and then both of them are equal to 0. Therefore, we have to split it into two. So I'm going to take the 2x minus 3 and equal it to 0. And I'm going to take the 3x minus 2 and equal it to 0. Here you have two different equations that you need to solve. So here we add 3 on both sides. You have 2x equals 3. And then we divide by 2. So x equals 3 halves. Here you add 2 on both sides. So you have 3x equals 2. And then we divide by 3. So we have x equals 2/3. And that will be your solution. X equals 3 halves and x equals 2/3. For this one though, you need to use the x method. What is the x method? Well, on the top we take a times c, and on the bottom we take b. A is the number in front of the x squared. Let me erase that because it looks like a 0. Okay. So a is the number in front of x squared. Now, if there's no number, you have to assume is 1. So here, a is 1. And c, so a is 1. C is the last number. In this case is 8. And b is the number multiplying x. So 1 times 8 is 8. And b is 6. So the question is, what two factors of positive 8, when you add them together, gives you positive 6? Well, 2 and 4. 2 times 4 is 8. 2 plus 4 is 6. So the procedure is as follows. You take that number, those two numbers, and you substitute for b. So 2x plus 4x plus 8 equals 0. Then you factor the first two and the last two. What can you factor between x squared and 2x? X. You're left with x plus 2. What can you factor between 4x and 8? 4. You're left with x plus 2. Remember, factorization is the opposite direction of distribution. So if I distribute 4, I get 4x plus 8. If I distribute x, I get x squared plus 2x. Now we factorize again. And what do we factor? Well, the terms that are the same. Here is x plus 2 and x plus 2. Those two terms are the same, so we can factor it out. And we're left with the numbers in front of the factor, which is x plus 4. And notice that we just found two linear factors that in order to solve, just like we did in the first one, we need to split it into two. So x plus 2 equals 0. X plus 4 equals 0. That means if we subtract 2 on both sides, x equals negative 2. And we subtract 4 on both sides, x equals negative 4. And those two are your factors, your solutions. Now, let's do the next one. Let me choose a different color. Now notice here for the x method, you have a c that is different from 1. So a times c, in this case a is 10 and c is 6. So 60. And b is negative 16. So two factors of 60, then when you add them gives you negative 16. Well, negative 10 and negative 6. Okay? Negative 10 times negative 6 is positive 60. Negative 10 plus negative 6 is negative 16. So those are the ones you substitute for x. So you have 10x squared minus 10x minus 6x plus 6. And we factor the first two, factor the last two. What can we factor between 10x squared and 10x? Well, 10x. And you're left with x minus 1. What can you factor between negative 6x plus 6? Negative 6. You're left with x minus 1. Now notice that x minus 1 is the same terms, and that's what you want. So that's the one that factors out, x minus 1. And then what's left is the other factor, 10x minus 6. Now we split it into two. X minus 1 equals 0, and 10x minus 6 equals 0. Now we add 1 on both sides, we get x equal to 1. We add 6 on both sides, we get 10x equal to 6. And in order to finish it, we need to divide by 10 on both sides. And you're left with x equals 6 over 10, which can be simplified into 3/5. And that's your answer. The next one, notice that the next one, the x method does not apply. Okay? There are no two factors of positive 16 that when you add them gives you 0. So here you need to use imaginary numbers. How do I do that? Well, we will solve just like you will solve a regular equation. We subtract 16 on both sides, and you get negative 16. Now we take the square root. Whenever we take a square root, you always have a plus or minus of negative 16. Now, the chapter that we learned before, which was chapter 3.1, was about imaginary numbers. So the square root of negative 16 is the same thing as I square root of 16. But what is the square root of 16? Square root of 16 is 4. So plus or minus 4i. And that is your solution. For the last example, you have 3 variables, 1 cubed, 1 squared, and 1 without an exponent. Well, exponent of 1, let's say. Let me change the colors. What I want you to do for this problem is I want you to factor a y. You factor a y, you're left with 3y squared minus 5y minus 2 equal to 0. For the term inside the parentheses, you can use the x method. So 3 times negative 2 is negative 6, and b is negative 5. So what two factors of negative 6, when you add them, gives you negative 5? Well, negative 6 and positive 1. Notice that negative 6 times positive 1 is negative 6. Negative 6 plus 1 is negative 5. So I'm going to do the same procedure with the term inside the parentheses. 3y squared minus 6y plus 1y minus 2. Notice that the 1, you do not have to write it down. If you want to write it down, that's fine. Why? We factor the first two, factor the last two. What can you factor between 3y squared and 6y? 3y. You're left with y minus 2. Notice that there's nothing to factor, so I'm going to write a 1. Y minus 2. Y minus 2 is the factor that is the same. And then the terms that are left are 3y plus 1 equal to 0. Now, notice that different from the previous problems, now you have 3 terms equal to 0. And that's right, you have to split them in 3. So y equals 0, y minus 2 equals 0, and 3y plus 1 equals 0. Y equals 0 is just that. Here you add 2 on both sides, y equals 2. Here you subtract 1, 3y equals negative 1. And then we divide by 3. So y equals negative 1/3. And that's your solution. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, let me know in class. Thank you.